Hello, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to today's webinar. My name's Jackie and today we're going to be looking at domestic reverse charge if you're in the construction industry scheme. Just before we begin though, as normal, a little bit of housekeeping first of all. So you will notice that you are placed on mute. So if you do see that your microphone is marked in red with a cross through it, please don't be alarmed. That shouldn't affect your ability to hear us today. That just means that you won't be able to speak directly to the team today. If you do have any questions, however, we do welcome them, so you can use the questions panel to submit your questions across to the team. If you click on the icon that looks like the speech bubble with the question mark in the middle, that will open up the questions panel for you there, and you can post your answers across to the team. Today, I'm joined by Michael, Tina and Abby, and they're all on hand to answer any of your domestic reverse charge questions there. We do also have a handout for today's session, which does have a copy of the slides that we're going to go through today. So if you do want to take a copy of that, we do recommend to take that while the session is running, but it may well be available on Sage City after today's session, around 2 hours after we end the session today. Okay, so first of all, I'll go through the contents of what we're going to cover today. So we're not going to go too far into the legislation itself. Today's all around processing it within your software. So we're going to be looking at notional VAT, just describing what notional VAT is and what that does to your VAT return. And then we're going to look at domestic reverse charge from two different points of view, from processing it on your incoming supplier invoices, and then also how to apply it to your outgoing customer invoices as well. We will run through a couple of common questions at the end of the session, and if there are any remaining questions at the end, then we will complete those before we end the session today. Just before we begin though, I do want to find out a little bit of information from you, just to find out who we do have joining us today. So do have a quick poll just to run. I'm just going to run that now. So just want to know if you are a subcontractor, if you're a main contractor, or if you are in fact a bit of both. So I'm just going to pop that across there now. Should see that appear on your screen any moment. So whether you're a subcontractor, a main contractor, or if you work as both a subcontractor and a main contractor. And this just gives me an idea of who we've got on the session today and which bits will be relevant to each. So I like to try and get around 70% of the votes. And they're coming through thick and fast there. Fabulous. And we're hitting 80% there, so I'm just going to reveal that to everyone so everyone can see what the answers were. They're still anonymous though. So the majority of you are both a subcontractor and a main contractor, so you're going to need to consider this on both your supplier and your customer invoices. Some of you are main contractors, so you'll be looking at this from your subcontractors, and some of you are subcontractors and you will need to consider this on your customer invoices that you're issuing to your main contractors. Okay, so I'm just going to hide the poll there. So thank you very much for your participation there. And like I said, we're going to start just by talking around notional VAT. But just before, like I said, we're not going to go too in depth with the legislation. But just to recap, this legislation did come in March 2021, eventually, after it was delayed several times. And it does apply to businesses within the construction industry scheme. However, the legislation is entirely separate. Okay, so it is completely separate from that. Now, what it does mean is there was a change in your VAT reporting requirements. And what this will do is it's going to apply notional VAT when you apply it to your supplier invoices. Okay, so if you need to apply domestic reverse charge to your supplier invoices, you're going to witness notional VAT. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit of theory here. Don't worry though, there is something in the software that will make your life much easier. You won't really need to understand the workings of it, but it is good to know for when you come to reconcile the boxes on your VAT return. So notional VAT, it isn't something that's new. It has been used in the past, in particular for things like carousel fraud, for the, I think it was the sale of microchips and computer chips previously. It is now being used for domestic reverse charge. And what this will do is it means that when you apply VAT to a supplier invoice, we are focusing on suppliers at the moment, it means that the VAT value of that invoice actually impacts two boxes. Okay, it impacts box 1 and box 4. And what that means overall is when we look at box 5, which is the box that we're really focusing on, which is whether we owe money to or from HMRC and how much it is, they actually cancel each other out. So you're probably thinking, why? Why would we do that? Why would we actually report it in 2 boxes? Now, the reason we're doing this is we're basically informing HMRC of what would have been charged under normal circumstances by applying the VAT to box 4, but we're then cancelling it out and doing that by putting a value into box 1. Now, you don't need to worry too much about why it's doing that. It's really to report it to HMRC, and you don't need to worry about doing this in a manual fashion. There is an item in the software that's going to take care of this for you when you process domestic reverse charge transactions. But I do just want to give you the heads up that when you're doing supplier invoices going forward, what you will start to see is a change in box 1 of your VAT return compared to what you were experiencing previously. So what we're going to do first of all is look at processing domestic reverse charge on your supplier invoices. Okay, so first of all, if we think about if we're receiving a supplier invoice from our supplier, we need to think about what we're looking for first of all to indicate that that invoice is domestic reverse charge. So we need to be checking our incoming invoices. Now there's 2 things that are highlighted in green here at the bottom. First of all, if it is a reverse charge invoice, it does need to clearly indicate that that is the case. So as you can see on my example here, there is some wording on there to indicate that it is subject to reverse charge. And it also indicates how much VAT would have applied under normal circumstances. What I also need to see on that same invoice is that the VAT has been calculated, which it has, but it hasn't been added to the total of the invoice. So there shouldn't be any VAT added to that total. Now, if I do receive an invoice from a subcontractor that I believe to be under domestic reverse charge, and they send me a normal invoice applying VAT, then what we do need to do is we do need to reject that and ask them to issue the invoice correctly. So just to look at this invoice here, you can see we've got both labour and materials. Now, domestic reverse charge does apply to the supplies which are subject to CIS. So normally that would be your labour element. However, if you do have an invoice that has both labour and goods or materials on there, then domestic reverse charge would in fact apply to the entire invoice. And again, our software will prevent you from posting a mix of tax codes on there. So we've seen the incoming invoice, we've checked everything there, so they have indicated it's reverse charge. They've calculated the VAT, they've informed us what it is, as we can see here, and they haven't added it to the total, as you can see here. So I'm happy that everything that's on there is correct. What I now need to do is transfer that into my Sage Account software. And to do that, what we have got in the software is 2 tax codes, which were created in version 26. And by default, they are tax codes T26 and T21. And we'll take a look at those in just a moment for you in the software. So the T21 tax code by default is when you're using domestic reverse charge and you're applying 20% VAT to that invoice. We have got a lower rate, it's not as commonly used, and that is the T26. Again, that's the default one. Yours might be slightly different because if you've used that code previously, it will look for the next available code. Another thing to notice is when we've processed this invoice, we've popped the net amount in. When we've put the tax code T21 in, what it has done to the VAT is it has cleared the VAT down to 0. So although you're probably expecting there to be 11 in each of these rows here for the VAT, it doesn't do that. It doesn't reflect the VAT at this point. It just reflects it on your VAT return. So once we've saved that, I'll just show you the impact on the VAT return, and then we'll go into a little demo to show you that. We've applied T21 to that transaction. It's popped through the invoice value of £110. We know from the incoming supplier invoice that normally £22 VAT would been applied, but it didn't show on the batch invoice. But when we've come to calculate the VAT return, you can see that my net element has been picked up in box 7, which is as normal. My VAT on my purchases is £22, but we can also see that additional box there. In box 1, we've got £22 in there as well. So overall, it means what I'm paying to or from HMRC is 0. I'm effectively moving and transferring that VAT on to the next person in the chain. Okay, so that is processing it within our software. So I'm just going to run through a quick demo just to sort of consolidate that for you. So bear with me, we'll just pop into the software. We'll just pop into our suppliers module. So just before we show you the invoice within here, if you want to check what your tax code is, you can do this within settings and configuration. And within here, this is all of your tax codes that are set up in your software. Now mine are all set to the default. So if we just scroll down a little bit further, you can see there my T21 is my CIS reverse charge standard rate. Open that up, you can see quite clearly it is set up for CIS reverse charge. It's linked to T1, so it knows that there's a 20% rate in the background. And also we've got T26 by default, and that is our reduced rate. So if you want to check which ones apply to you, just in case yours are slightly different, that's within settings and then configuration. Okay, so just to pop on an invoice. So I've got my CIS data up and running here. Now I am using the CIS module, but another key thing to note is to use domestic reverse charge, you do not need to be using the CIS module. This works regardless of whether or not that is activated. But I am going to do it in my CIS software just because I've got that data set up and running. So if I pop on an invoice for Harper & Sons, and I pop on my invoice for the labour first, I'll say 100, change this to T21. As you can see, VAT has gone down to 0. And what we'll do is we'll just pop on some materials there as well because it's part of the same invoice. So if it is part of the same invoice, then the whole thing is subject to domestic reverse charge. What I'll just do is I'll show you that in just a second. So if I try to put this on a different one, it should give me a message. Nope, it's not giving me a message today. It should normally give me a message to say I can't have a mix of tax codes on there. So I can't mix and match my tax codes. And I'll come back to that one in just a moment there. So what that's done on the VAT return, like I say, that should be impacting boxes 1, 4 and 7 there. Check those settings in just a moment, see if we can work out where that one's gone through. Now, one thing I'll notice, point out before we move on to the next part, which is the customer side of things, is if you do have a supplier and you know that you're going to regularly use domestic reverse charge on them, what we can do is we can go into the defaults and change their default tax code over to T21 so it'll automatically be applied each time there. So, and that means next time I come to do a batch invoice, it will automatically apply the T21 when I select that particular supplier there. So that might be quite useful to remember there as well. So that is processing on your suppliers. Now I'm going to just show you the customer side of things now, how to process a domestic reverse charge invoice on your customers, because this is slightly different. And the impacts on the return, again, are slightly different as well. So quite a few of you mentioned that you're both a subcontractor and a main contractor, so you will need to be using these tax codes for both your customer and supplier invoices. So I'm just going to pop back onto the PowerPoint for one moment. And that is us back on there now. Okay. So the first thing is when you're doing a customer invoice is making sure that you know if you should be applying domestic reverse charge to that particular invoice. So it will apply as long as your customer is VAT registered, they are receiving services that are subject to the construction industry scheme, so it is actually a construction industry scheme transaction, and that they're not considered the end users in the supply chain. Now, an example of this, and there are quite a few examples out there, which if you go onto the HMRC website, I'm sure you'll find lots of different examples on there. But a really good example of an end user is if you're selling to a member of the public, because they're not VAT registered and they're not part of the construction industry scheme, and they will not be providing an onward supply of services. So you know in that case that you will just be processing them under normal VAT rules. However, if you are actually supplying to someone who is further contracting on those supplies and they are VAT registered and under the CIS scheme, then it's likely domestic reverse charge does apply. Now, what we've got on the screen at the moment is actually the flowchart from HMRC. So HMRC do have a flowchart for both your customer invoices and your supplier invoices, and they are provided later on in the handout for you, which tells you where and when domestic reverse charge would apply and when normal VAT rules would apply. So I'm just going to run through this because it's a really handy tool. If you're in that position where you're about to process an invoice and you're not quite sure, going through this will really help you out. So the first question is, does the supply fall within the scope of CIS? So if it does fall within CIS, then we can move on to the next question. But if it's not a CIS transaction, for example, it might be that it's a goods only invoice, then normal VAT rules would apply. But if it's a mixture of both goods and labour, then we can move down to the next one. And if VAT would normally be applied at the standard or reduced rate, again, we can continue down. But if not, if, for example, it's zero rated, then normal VAT rules would apply. Further down, is your customer VAT registered? So again, if it's a member of the public that you're providing a service for, they're not going to be VAT registered. So normal VAT rules would apply for those. But if they are another business and they are VAT registered, then we can go down to the next question, which is your customer registered for CIS? So if they are registered for CIS, then we continue on, and we need to then just check, have they provided confirmation that they're an end user? Now, if they are an end user and they're a business and they're registered under CIS, then they should have indicated to you in writing to let you know that they are an end user, okay? If they are an end user, then normal VAT rules would apply, but if they haven't, then domestic reverse charge would apply. So that's a good tool for you to understand where to apply domestic reverse charge and where not to. Now again, the same rules apply as the supplier invoice earlier. So when we're processing the invoice, we need to make it very clear on that invoice that domestic reverse charge applies. We need to calculate the VAT that would have applied under normal circumstances and inform them of that, but not add it to the total. So let's take a look at processing an invoice. Under the invoices and credits module, what you can do is you can pop on your invoice, each line again, popping your T21 onto there, as you can see there, which we'll do a demonstration of in just a moment. And what this does is once we've used that T21 tax code, is it takes care of the wording on the invoice layout for us. Now this is automatically applied to our standard layouts by default. So once you're on version 26, if you use a T21 or a T26, you'll see the wording here. This is applied automatically to the layout. Now if you do have a custom layout that has been designed specifically for you prior to version 26, then it is something we recommend just getting in contact with the team on, and they'll be able to point you in the direction of some guidance of getting that wording onto there for you. Now the great thing with this is it's conditional. Okay, it's conditional formatting. So if we use this layout and used a T1, no wording would appear. But if we do use this layout and we use a T21, then the wording does appear. So we can use the same invoice for both our non-CIS customers and for our domestic reverse charge customers as well. Just to show you what that looks like on the VAT return before I just run through a little demonstration for you, if I just pop onto the next slide, is it slightly different in how it impacts your VAT return. So a standard sale to a customer under standard VAT would normally impact box 1 with your VAT and box 6 with your net value. Now, under domestic reverse charge, when you use a T21 or a T26, the only box that's impacted is box 6. So again, box 1 is starting to look very different to how it did prior to domestic reverse charge. So when we used to run the domestic reverse charge one-to-ones and talk people through the process, a lot of questions came around, why is my box 1 figure so different? And it's because our purchases are now picked up in box 1 and our sales are no longer picking up in box 1. So it can start to look a bit odd in comparison to pre-domestic reverse charge. So I'm just going to pop back onto the demo. So I'll be 1 second, we'll just switch over again. And this time we're just popping into customers. So in order to get that printable invoice, we do need to create the invoice from the invoice and credits module. Now I have already created one because there's a few settings that I need to get right to make sure the demo works. So I just want to make sure one of them works for you. So I have pre-created one, Blue Peter style. So I've just created this invoice. If we just take a look at it there, open that up, just opened on the other screen. And as you can see here, I've just popped one line on there for the services. And if I just pop into the edit item line, that little icon there, you can see that I've got £10,000 and I've popped it onto a T21 tax code. So that's all applied there. Now again, if you look at the net column, all £10,000 is in there and there's no VAT in the VAT column. Now if I was to close this, because it's already saved, pop into print, and I'm just going to pick one of my standard layouts. So these are all standard, these come with the software. I'm just going to pick the top one there, but go to print this one out. What you will notice there is immediately the wording has appeared automatically and it's indicating what amount of VAT would have applied under normal circumstances. So what we say is we're basically passing that liability on to our customer. We're saying you need to deal with this under domestic reverse charge rules. We're not charging it for you. We're not declaring it to HMRC, but we want you to take care of that on your VAT return under domestic reverse charge rules. So if they were using Sage, they would be processing that using a T21 tax code as well. Okay, so I'm just going to pop back to the PowerPoint. We're going to go through a couple of common questions, and I think there's a few questions coming through there, so please do keep them coming across, and if the team can get them answered, they will do for you. Bear with me, I'll just pop back onto the PowerPoint. Okay, so the first thing I've popped on there is those flowcharts. Okay, so these flowcharts can be found on the technical guide on the HMRC website, really useful for working out whether or not a customer invoice needs to have domestic reverse charge applied, which is Annex 1, but also if you're just checking whether or not an invoice you've received from a supplier is correct. Again, Annex 2 is very useful for that. So you can ask yourself these questions. If the answer is yes, you go to the right. If it's no, you go down to the next one. Okay, so please do follow that up. If you want to get the real ones, you can pop onto the HMRC website. They're just copied from there. Okay. So frequently asked questions. So these are some of the common questions when we were doing the CIS domestic reverse charge one-to-ones that we would get asked on a regular basis. Now, normally, if your invoice contains materials and labour, what you would be doing is applying domestic reverse charge to the whole invoice. Makes it a bit easier for processing. But there can be exceptions to this. If the amount of labour on there is so entirely low, it's a very heavily goods orientated invoice, then it may be that you can apply for the 5% disregard on that. So again, HMRC guidance if you want a bit more information on there. What if you use VAT cash accounting or flat rate VAT? VAT cash accounting doesn't apply under domestic reverse charge. Okay, so what it will do is when you put an invoice on using a T21, it won't wait for that invoice to be paid for it to be picked up on your VAT return. It will literally apply at the point of invoice. Under the flat rate scheme, then we do recommend that you consider whether or not it's going to be beneficial for you to remain on the flat rate scheme and be using domestic reverse charge. And this question doesn't get asked as much now, but if you do still have a project that spans the 1st of March 2021 when this legislation came in, because construction contracts can actually take some time, then you do need to look at the tax point of your invoice. Like I say, now it's not as likely that this will apply to you, but it is a common question that we did get once domestic reverse charge came into effect. The other key question there is, do I need the CIS module for domestic reverse charge? No, you don't need to be using the module. If you are using the module, you can use this in addition to the domestic reverse charge. So you would use the same nominal codes, which gets onto question 2. You'd use the same nominal codes as you would previously. So if you're using the CIS module and you're using the 6000 codes, continue to do so. It's only the tax code that needs to change for domestic reverse charge to apply. And the last one there is, does domestic reverse charge apply if you use an agency? So just remember, the domestic reverse charge applies to the supply that falls under CIS. So if an agency isn't under the CIS scheme, or they're not registered for CIS themselves, it's unlikely that domestic reverse charge is going to apply if you're going through that flow chart. So just use those flow charts to your advantage there. Okay, so just to summarize, use those flow charts to establish where domestic reverse charge applies on both your customer and your supplier invoices. Where you're using domestic reverse charge, the T21 by default tax code can be used if a standard VAT would normally apply, and T26 is normally for the reduced items there as well. Domestic reverse charge would normally be applied to the whole invoice, even if there's goods attached, as long as they're on the same invoice there. And if you think a supplier has invoiced you incorrectly, then you will need to reject that invoice and ask for that to be reissued correctly. And just finally, there again, you don't need to be using the CIS module for domestic reverse charge. So we've got some useful links there. So if you do want to find out more and you want more about the legislation itself, obviously HMRC website's a good place to start. But our articles as well do go through some of the changes as well in terms of the legislation. So that would be a really good place to start as well. Just to talk about the upcoming webinars, so we do have some webinars coming up next week. I've picked out 2 in particular, but we do have one tomorrow on journals. So Michael will be going through journals with you. So if you do want to join us for journals, please do. We have festive messaging next week. So if you are wanting to send out a little festive message to your customers, we're just going to show you how to pop that onto a letter. But also, if you've got things like price changes, unfortunately, we do have to consider that there is a cost of living going on at the moment. So if you do need to indicate to your customers that there will be changes, then you can use the letters feature to do so. And also, we're looking at credit control. So again, in line with the cost of living crisis, it may be that you need to keep tabs a little bit closer on what your customers are doing in terms of paying you on time. Okay, we also have Sage memberships. Okay, so if you are interested in finding out a little bit more about what's involved in your membership, we do have a recording of a previous session available. So we have that on the recordings page, which will be in your follow-up email today. But we have access to Sage University, which is online training. We also have Sage City, which is your online platform it's got forums, you've got the ability to submit ideas and requests on the software, and also the Sage Masterclass as well. So Sage Masterclass Basically, what we've got with the masterclasses is we've got 2 seasons. Now we're currently on season 2. Season 1 was all around finding and keeping great people. And what we have on here is we have lots of guest speakers, blogs, lots of videos on there as well. And what we've also got is season 2. Season 2 is all about productivity as well. So if you are interested in checking out the masterclasses, it's sage.com/UK/masterclass. Okay, we're just going to move on to the questions. I'm just going to see if there's any that I can pick up for you. So I'm just going to pop myself on mute for a few moments there. Do keep the questions coming across and we'll try and answer as many of them as we can. Okay. But if you are leaving us in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. What I'll also do is see if I can work out my little error earlier on, see if I can demonstrate that properly. So if you are hanging on, please do, and we'll see if we can get that one demonstrated properly for you. But in the meantime, if you are leaving, thank you very much for joining, and we'll just finalize any questions there. Okay, thanks very much for holding there. So in fact, I apologise, I will go back on myself there. The restriction of not being able to put different tax codes on has actually been removed. I think that was based on customer feedback there. Previously, what it wouldn't let you do was do a mismatch of tax codes on there because you couldn't previously have an invoice with VAT applied on part of the invoice and with domestic reverse charge on another part, but apparently that has now been removed, so you can put a change on there, but normally if you're doing domestic reverse charge it would apply to the whole invoice. Okay, so I'm just seeing if there's any further questions coming through there. I think we've answered everything for today. So I think what we'll do is we'll leave that there for today, but thank you very much for joining us. We hope to see you in another session soon. Like I say, we've got another one tomorrow at 2 o'clock. So if you do want to join us on that one, you're more than welcome to join us. Again, the link for that will be in your follow-up email, which should be with you in the next couple of hours today. Okay, so thank you very much from the team, and we'll see you again on another session really soon. Take care.